The fluorescent lights of the grocery store cast harsh shadows across Maya's arms as she reached for a box of cereal on the top shelf. Her sleeves had rolled up without her noticing, revealing the intricate network of pale lines that crisscrossed. Her forearms like a roadmap of pain she'd tried so hard to forget. A small gasp from behind made her freeze mid-reach. She turned to see a little girl, maybe 6 years old, staring with wide, curious eyes at the marks that Maya had spent 3 years learning to hide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mommy, what happened to the lady's arms? The child whispered, tugging on her mother's coat. The mother's face flushed crimson as she yanked her daughter closer. Don't stare, honey. It's not polite. But Maya caught the woman's expression. The mixture of pity and uncomfortable recognition that she'd seen countless times before. The look that said broken. The look that said damaged goods. Maya quickly pulled her sleeves down and abandoned her shopping cart, walking briskly toward the exit. The automatic doors couldn't open fast enough. Outside in the parking lot, she leaned against her car and took shaky breaths of the cool evening air. 3 years of therapy, 3 years of telling herself she was healing, and still a child's innocent question could send her spiraling back to that dark place where the scars had been created. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Julie. Ranch job interview tomorrow. Don't chicken out. You need this fresh start. Maya stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. The job was at some cattle ranch 2 hours outside the city, working as a bookkeeper for a man named Jack Sullivan. Julie had found the listing and practically forced Maya to apply, insisting that getting away from the city and all its painful memories was exactly what she needed. The drive to Sullivan Ranch the next morning took Maya through rolling hills dotted with oak trees and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully under the wide Montana sky. She'd grown up in cities her whole life, first Chicago, then Denver, and the vast openness of the landscape made her feel both liberated and terrifyingly exposed. There was nowhere to hide out here, no crowds to disappear into, no anonymity to shelter behind. The ranch house appeared around a bend in the gravel road. A sprawling log structure with a wraparound porch and large windows that caught the morning sunlight. It looked like something from a magazine about rustic living, the kind of place where normal families gathered for holidays and made memories that didn't involve police reports or hospital visits. Maya parked near the front steps and checked her appearance in the rearview mirror one final time. Long sleeves despite the warm weather, hair pulled back neatly. Professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was halfway up the porch steps when the front door opened and a man stepped out who quite literally took her breath away. Jack Sullivan had to be at least 6'6", with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and hands that looked like they could probably lift a full-grown steer without breaking a sweat. His brown hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, and his face had the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of outdoor work. But it was his eyes that stopped Maya in her tracks. They were the deep green of pine forests, and when they looked at her, she felt like he was seeing something she'd forgotten existed. "You must be Maya Chun," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that definitely wasn't Montana-born. "I'm Jack Sullivan. Thanks for driving all the way out here." Maya found her voice somewhere around her second attempt. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Sullivan. I know my resume is a bit unconventional for ranch work." Jack smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from intimidating to genuinely warm. "Call me Jack, and honestly, I'm more interested in finding someone reliable than someone with cattle experience. Numbers are numbers, whether they're tracking feed costs or corporate budgets." He gestured for her to follow him inside, and Maya was struck by how the interior of the ranch house managed to feel both spacious and cozy. Leather furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace. exposed wooden beams overhead, bookshelves lined with everything from classic literature to modern ranch management guides. It was the home of someone who read, who thought, who had depth beyond the obvious physical presence. "Coffee?" Jack asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Fair warning, I make it strong enough to wake the dead." "That sounds perfect," Maya replied, settling into one of the chairs he'd indicated. She found herself relaxing slightly in the comfortable atmosphere, though she remained conscious of keeping her sleeves pulled down and her arms positioned carefully. Jack returned with 2 steaming mugs and sat across from her at the solid oak table. "So Maya Chun, accounting degree from University of Colorado. 5 years experience with Patterson and Associates in Denver. Excellent references. But you're looking to trade corporate life for cattle ranch bookkeeping in the middle of nowhere, Montana. What's the real story?" The question was asked gently, but Maya felt her carefully constructed professional facade wobble slightly. Most potential employers would have simply accepted her prepared answer about seeking a quieter lifestyle and better work-life balance. Jack Sullivan was clearly not most employers. "I needed a change of scenery," she said carefully. "Denver had become complicated for me. Sometimes starting over requires going somewhere completely different." Jack studied her face with those perceptive green eyes. "Complicated how, if you don't mind me asking?" "I'm not trying to pry, but I live alone on this ranch most of the time. If I'm going to have someone working here regularly, I need to know they're not running from something that might follow them and cause problems." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about. No debts or angry ex-boyfriends or anything like that. It's more personal. Family issues that got out of hand." "Family issues," Jack repeated neutrally. "Those can be the hardest kind to heal from." Something in his tone made Maya look at him more carefully. There was understanding in his expression, the kind that came from personal experience rather than polite sympathy. "You sound like you speak from experience." "We all have our stories, Maya. The question is whether we let them define us or whether we use them to become stronger." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jack took a sip of his coffee, giving her time to process his words. "Tell me about your accounting experience. What kind of systems have you worked with?" They spent the next hour discussing software programs, bookkeeping procedures, and the specific needs of ranch management. Maya found herself genuinely interested in the complexity of agricultural accounting, the seasonal fluctuations in income and expenses, the government regulations and tax implications she'd never encountered in corporate work. More importantly, she found herself relaxing in Jack's presence in a way she hadn't experienced with anyone in years. "The job pays $45,000 annually," Jack said as their interview wound down. "Health insurance included, 2 weeks paid vacation, and you're welcome to use the guest cabin on the property if you want to avoid the commute. It's small but comfortable, and it might help with that fresh start you're looking for." Maya's heart jumped at the offer of the cabin. Living on the ranch would mean complete separation from her old life, from the apartment where she'd spent so many dark nights, from the hospital where she'd learned what it meant to fight for survival. "That's very generous. I wasn't expecting housing to be part of the arrangement." "I'm a practical man, Maya. If you're living here, you'll be available for emergencies, and you'll have time to really understand how the ranch operates. Plus, to be honest, it gets pretty quiet out here. Having another person around wouldn't be unwelcome." Was he lonely? Maya found herself wondering about this giant of a man living alone on hundreds of acres with only cattle for company. What had brought him to such an isolated life? What was his story of needing to start over? When would you need an answer? She asked, "Take your time." "But Maya," Jack stood up, his full height once again impressive in the confines of the kitchen. "Whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from or trying to heal from. This place has a way of helping people find peace. Montana has a way of putting things in perspective. As Maya drove back toward the city, Jack's words echoed in her mind. Whatever you're trying to heal from. Had it been that obvious? She'd thought she'd gotten better at hiding the damage, at presenting a normal facade to the world. But something about Jack Sullivan's perceptive gaze had seen right through her carefully constructed walls. That evening, she sat in her studio apartment staring at the job offer paperwork Jack had given her. The salary was actually higher than what she'd been making in Denver, and the idea of living in that peaceful guest cabin felt like a dream she'd never dared to imagine. But it also meant admitting that she was running away, that 3 years of therapy and healing hadn't made her strong enough to rebuild her life in familiar surroundings. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Julie's name appeared on the screen. So, how did it go? Her sister asked without preamble. He offered me the job. Maya, that's fantastic. When do you start? I haven't accepted yet. Silence. On the other end of the line, then Julie's voice, gentler now. What are you afraid of? It was a question Maya had been avoiding asking herself. What was she afraid of? Jack Sullivan had seemed kind, professional, respectful. The work sounded interesting and manageable. The setting was beautiful and peaceful. So why was she hesitating? I'm afraid of what happens when he figures out how broken I am, Maya admitted quietly. He seems like a good person, Julie. What if I'm not ready to be around good people yet? Maya, Julie's voice was firm now. You are not broken. You survived something terrible, and you've spent 3 years putting yourself back together. That doesn't make you broken. That makes you strong. I have scars, Jules. Physical scars that people stare at. Emotional scars that make me wake up screaming sometimes. How is that strong? Because you're still here. Because you're still fighting. Because you're considering taking a job that requires you to trust someone new, to put yourself in an unfamiliar situation, to take a risk on your own future. Broken people don't do those things, Maya. Healing people do. After hanging up, Maya walked to her bathroom mirror and slowly rolled up her sleeves. The scars were there, undeniable evidence of the worst night of her life. Some were thin white lines that had faded to barely visible marks. Others were wider, more prominent, telling the story of deeper wounds that had required surgical repair. She'd memorized every single one over the past 3 years, cataloged them like a tragic inventory of her own survival. But as she looked at them now, she tried to see them through Julie's eyes, through the perspective Jack Sullivan might have. Not as marks of damage, but as proof of survival. Not as evidence of weakness, but as testimony to strength. Each scar represented a moment when her body had fought to heal itself, when her spirit had refused to give up despite unbearable pain. Maya made her decision. The next morning, she called Jack Sullivan and accepted the job. He sounded genuinely pleased, and they agreed that she would start the following Monday. That gave her a week to pack up her apartment, arrange for her belongings to be moved, and mentally prepare for what felt like the biggest leap of faith she'd taken since leaving the hospital 3 years ago. Moving day arrived gray and drizzly, matching Maya's nervous mood as she followed the moving truck through the winding roads to Sullivan Ranch. The guest cabin turned out to be a charming one-bedroom structure about a quarter-mile from the main house, nestled among pine trees with a small porch and large windows that offered views of the surrounding pastures. It was simple but comfortable, with hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, and a kitchen that was small but well-equipped. Jack appeared as the movers were unloading her boxes, insisting on helping despite Maya's protests that it wasn't necessary. She watched nervously as he effortlessly lifted pieces of furniture that had required 2 men to carry, but he was careful and respectful of her belongings, asking where she wanted everything placed rather than making assumptions. This is really beautiful, Maya said as they stood on the cabin's porch after the movers had left. "I can't believe this is going to be my home." "It's been empty for 2 years," Jack replied. "It's good to see it lived in again. My sister used to stay here when she visited, but she moved to California and doesn't make it out much anymore." "Do you have other family nearby?" Jack was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the cattle grazing in the distance. "Not anymore. My parents passed a few years back, and Sarah's busy with her own life. It's mostly just me and the cattle these days." There was something in his tone that suggested more to the story, but Maya didn't push. She understood about having family situations that were too complicated or painful to explain to near strangers. "I should let you get settled," Jack continued. "But Maya, if you need anything at all, the main house is just a short walk. Don't hesitate to ask." As he walked away, Maya watched his retreating figure and wondered about the man who'd offered her this refuge. Jack Sullivan was clearly successful, judging by the size and condition of his ranch. He was kind and respectful, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood struggle in a personal way, that his offer of a fresh start came from his own experience of needing one. That first week of work established a comfortable routine. Maya arrived at the main house each morning to find Jack already gone, out checking on cattle or mending fences or handling the dozens of tasks that kept a working ranch operational. He'd left coffee ready and a list of accounting tasks that needed attention. The books were actually in good shape, suggesting that Jack was more business savvy than his rugged appearance might indicate. But there were definitely efficiencies to be gained and systems to be streamlined. Maya threw herself into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised her. Corporate accounting had always felt abstract, dealing with numbers that represented products or services she never saw. But ranch accounting was connected to real things. The cost of feed for cattle she could see grazing outside the office window. Veterinary bills for animals Jack spoke about by name. Equipment purchases for machinery she watched him operate. In the evenings, she explored the property around her cabin, walking the fence lines and discovering small streams and groves of trees that felt like secret places untouched by the outside world. The silence was profound after years of city living, broken only by natural sounds, wind through pine trees, cattle lowing in the distance, the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. It was peaceful in a way Maya hadn't experienced since childhood, and she found herself sleeping better than she had in years. The nightmares that had plagued her for so long became less frequent, and when she did wake in the dark, the sight of stars through her bedroom window somehow made it easier to find calm again. Jack maintained a respectful distance during her first week, appearing briefly in the mornings to discuss any urgent matters and checking in by phone during the day if questions arose. But Maya was aware of his presence on the property, catching glimpses of him working in the distance, hearing his truck start early each morning. There was something comforting about knowing he was nearby, though she couldn't quite explain why. Friday afternoon, she was deep in spreadsheets when the office door opened, and Jack appeared carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that was part business, part social. "Thought you might need caffeine," he said, setting 1 cup near her computer. "How was your first week?" "Productive," Maya replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've got preliminary recommendations for streamlining the bookkeeping system, and I found some tax deductions you've been missing. Nothing dramatic, but it should save some money and time." Jack settled into the chair across from her desk. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. Fresh eyes on familiar problems." He paused, studying her face. "But I'm more interested in how you're settling in personally. The cabin comfortable? Everything you need? It's perfect." "Really, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity." "Jack, I was starting to think I'd never find a place where I could feel normal again." "Normal," Jack repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting word choice. What does normal feel like for you, Maya?" The question caught her off guard. "Most People would have simply accepted her thanks and moved on to other topics. But Jack Sullivan seemed genuinely interested in her answer, and there was something in his expression that made her feel safe enough to be honest. Normal feels like waking up without immediately wondering if today is going to be the day everything falls apart again, she said slowly. Normal feels like being able to focus on work without having flashbacks interrupt my concentration. Normal feels like being around another person without constantly worrying about what they're thinking about. M.E. Jack nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. And how's that going so far? The feeling normal part? Maya considered the question seriously. Better than I expected. There's something about this place that makes it easier to breathe. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. There's something about wide open spaces that puts problems in perspective. Makes you realize how much of what feels overwhelming is actually manageable when you give it room to spread out. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee and looking out the office window at the pasture beyond. Maya found herself studying Jack's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. He had to be in his early 40s, she guessed, old enough to have acquired the kind of quiet confidence that came from experience, but young enough that the silver in his hair seemed premature. Jack, she said impulsively, what brought you to ranch life? You don't seem like someone who grew up planning to raise cattle in Montana. He turned to look at her directly, and Maya caught a flash of something vulnerable in his expression. Before he composed himself, you're right. I grew up in Texas, worked in law enforcement for 15 years. This ranch was supposed to be a retirement plan, something to do when I got too old for police work. But you retired early? Jack was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. I retired when I realized that trying to fix other people's problems had cost me the ability to fix my own. Sometimes you have to step away from everything familiar to figure out who you actually are underneath all the roles you've been playing. The honesty in his words resonated with something deep in Maya's chest. Is that what this place did for you? Help you figure out who you are? Still working on that part, Jack admitted with a rueful smile. But it's easier to think clearly when you're not surrounded by reminders of all the ways you've failed before. Maya felt a connection forming between them, a recognition of shared experience, even though their stories were clearly different. Do you miss it? Police work? I miss feeling useful. I miss the sense that what I did mattered in some tangible way. Cattle don't really care if you save them from themselves, and spreadsheets don't send thank you cards. Jack's tone was self-deprecating, but Maya heard the underlying truth. You matter here, she said quietly. This ranch, this peaceful place you've created, it matters. It's been a lifeline for me, and I'm guessing I'm not the first person who's found healing here. Jack looked at her with surprise, as if the idea that his refuge might serve others hadn't occurred to him. Maya, can I ask you something personal? Her instinct was to deflect, to change the subject before the conversation ventured into territory she wasn't ready to explore. But something about Jack's approach, his willingness to share his own vulnerabilities, made her nod. What happened to you? Not the details if you're not ready to share them, but the shape of it. What are you healing from? Maya felt her heart rate increase, felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied any discussion of her past. But Jack's eyes were kind, patient, and she realized that she wanted to tell him. Not everything, not yet, but enough to explain why his offer of a fresh start had meant so much. 3 years ago, I was in a relationship with someone who turned out to be very different from who I thought he was, she began carefully. When I tried to leave, he made it clear that wasn't an option he was willing to accept. The night I finally got the courage to pack my things and go, he decided that if he couldn't have me, no one could. Jack's expression darkened, and Maya saw his hands clench slightly. He hurt you. He tried to kill me, very nearly succeeded. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and 6 months in physical therapy learning to use my left arm properly again. Maya pulled up her left sleeve slightly, revealing the edge of a scar that disappeared under the fabric. These are reminders of the worst night of my life, but also proof that I survived it. Jack was very still, his green eyes fixed on the partial scar she'd shown him. When he looked back at her face, the expression she saw there wasn't pity or discomfort. It was something else entirely. "Maya," he said quietly, "those aren't reminders of the worst night of your life. They're proof of the strongest night of your life. They're evidence that when someone tried to destroy you, you fought back hard enough to live." The words hit her like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. In 3 years of therapy, no one had ever framed her scars quite like that, as evidence of strength rather than reminders of trauma. "I've never thought of them that way," she admitted. "Maybe it's time to start." The weeks that followed Maya's revelation to Jack settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and wonderful. For the first time in 3 years, she found herself looking forward to each day rather than simply enduring it. Jack never mentioned their conversation again, but something had shifted between them. His presence became less formal, more genuine, and Maya began to notice small gestures that spoke of thoughtfulness and care. He started leaving fresh coffee and homemade muffins in the office each morning. When Maya mentioned enjoying the wildflowers blooming near her cabin, she found a small bouquet on her desk the next day with a note that simply read, "Thought these might brighten your workspace." When a late spring storm knocked out power to the guest cabin, Jack appeared within minutes with a generator and stayed to make sure everything was working properly before heading back to the main house. These small kindnesses might have felt overwhelming to the Maya of 6 months ago, but now they felt like gentle reminders that good people existed in the world. People who helped without expecting anything in return. People who saw vulnerability and responded with protection rather than exploitation. Maya found herself working longer hours, not because Jack demanded it, but because she genuinely enjoyed the complexity of ranch management. She discovered that Jack owned significantly more land than she'd initially realized. Nearly 3,000 acres that supported not only cattle, but also leased hunting grounds and timber rights. The financial picture was impressively diverse, showing a man who understood that successful ranching required multiple revenue streams and careful long-term planning. More intriguingly, she found records indicating that Jack had purchased the ranch with cash, no mortgage or loans. Either he'd inherited substantial money, or his previous career in law enforcement had been far more lucrative than typical police work. Maya made a mental note to ask about it when the opportunity arose naturally, though she was learning that Jack Sullivan revealed information about himself slowly and only when he chose to. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning when Maya arrived at the office to find Jack sitting at her desk, staring at a letter with an expression that managed to be both resigned and deeply troubled. He looked up when she entered, and she was struck by how much older he seemed than he had the day before. "Everything okay?" Maya asked, setting down her coffee and noting the tension in Jack's shoulders. "Got a letter from my former partner in Houston," Jack said, holding up the official-looking document. "Apparently there's been some developments in an old case I worked. They want me to testify at a federal hearing." Maya settled into the chair across from her own desk, sensing that this was one of those moments when listening was more important than offering solutions. "That sounds complicated," Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one word for it. The case involved a trafficking ring that we spent 2 years building evidence against. Took down some major players, but the investigation cost me pretty much everything else in my life." The weight in Jack's voice suggested a story with painful depths, and Maya found herself leaning forward slightly. In the weeks they'd been working together, Jack had remained largely mysterious about his past beyond the basic facts of police work and early retirement. Now it seemed like the careful barriers he'd built around those experiences were beginning to crack. "What kind of cost?" Maya asked gently. Jack was quiet for a long time, staring out the office window at the cattle grazing peacefully in the morning sunlight. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone examining old wounds that had never properly healed. The investigation required deep undercover work. Months of pretending to be someone else, building relationships with criminals, doing things that went against every moral principle I'd ever held. The department psychologist said it was necessary for the greater good, that stopping the trafficking justified whatever personal compromise was required. Maya waited, understanding that Jack was working up to something difficult. "I was married then, had been for 8 years. Sarah, my wife, not my sister. She tried to be understanding at first. But watching someone you love disappear into an undercover identity, watching them come home changed each night by the things they've had to do, it takes a toll." The pain in Jack's expression was raw, unguarded in a way Maya had never seen from him before. She found herself wanting to reach across the space between them and offer some kind of comfort, but she sensed that he needed to get through the telling before he could accept any support. The case took 2 years to build. 2 years of living a double life, of lying to everyone including myself about what it was doing to me. By the time we made the arrests, by the time we got convictions that put away some truly evil people, I'd lost everything that mattered. Sarah left, said she couldn't recognize the man I'd become, and honestly, she was right. Jack finally looked at Maya directly, and she saw a vulnerability in his green eyes that explained so much about the careful way he'd approached their working relationship, the respectful distance he maintained, the genuine surprise he'd shown when she'd suggested that his ranch mattered to people. "The testimony they want from me now could reopen investigations into some of the people we didn't catch the first time. Major figures who had enough money and connections to avoid prosecution. It could be important work, work that matters, but Maya, I don't know if I can go back to that world. I don't know if I can be that person again, even temporarily." Maya absorbed the weight of what Jack had shared, understanding now why a successful law enforcement officer had chosen isolation and cattle ranching. The heroic work that had defined his career had also destroyed his personal life and sense of self. Coming to Montana hadn't been a retirement plan, it had been a rescue mission. "What does your gut tell you?" Maya asked. "About whether this testimony is something you need to do?" Jack smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she'd seen since finding him with the letter. "That's a very Texas way to approach decision-making. My gut says those trafficking victims deserve justice, even if it costs me personal peace. But my head says I've already sacrificed enough for cases that never really end. They just move to different cities with different players. What about your heart?" The question seemed to catch Jack off guard, as if the idea of consulting his emotional response hadn't occurred to him. He was quiet for several minutes, and Maya could see him working through layers of complicated feelings. "My heart says I'm tired of running from who I used to be. Maybe testifying would be a way to find some peace with that part of my life instead of just hiding from it." Maya nodded slowly. "That sounds like wisdom to me. But Jack, whatever you decide, you don't have to go through it alone. I know we haven't known each other very long, but you've given me a place to heal. If you need support while you're dealing with this, I'd like to return the favor." Jack's expression shifted to something Maya couldn't quite identify, surprise, mixed with gratitude and perhaps something deeper. "Maya, you don't understand what you're offering. If I testify, if I go back to Houston and stir up old cases, there could be consequences. The people we're talking about don't have qualms about intimidating witnesses or going after anyone connected to law enforcement. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to protect you. You came here to get away from violence, not to get pulled into someone else's dangerous past." Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful ranch landscape. That had become her sanctuary. Jack's concern was touching, but it also revealed something about how he saw her, as someone fragile who needed protection rather than someone strong enough to offer support. Jack, 3 years ago, someone tried to kill me with a kitchen knife. He nearly succeeded. I fought back hard enough to survive, and then I spent 3 years learning how to live again. I'm not the same person who was victimized in that apartment. I'm someone who knows what it means to face down evil and refuse to let it win. She turned back to face him and saw that he was staring at her with an expression of dawning recognition. If you decide to testify, if you decide to go back and face whatever you're running from, I want to help. Not because I'm naive about the risks, but because I understand what it means to choose courage over safety. Jack was very still for a long moment, studying her face as if seeing something he'd missed before. Maya, are you sure you understand what you're saying? I'm saying that you helped me start seeing my scars as proof of strength instead of evidence of damage. Maybe it's time for you to start seeing your past as proof of your capacity for justice instead of evidence of personal failure. The words seemed to hit Jack with unexpected force. He stood up abruptly and walked to the other window, his back to Maya as he processed what she'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I've spent 4 years convincing myself that leaving law enforcement was about finding peace, about choosing a simpler life. But maybe you're right. Maybe I've just been hiding from the possibility of failing again, of losing myself in work that matters. Maya joined him at the window, close enough to offer support, but not so close as to crowd him. What would Sarah, your wife, what would she say if she knew you were considering going back? Jack's laugh held genuine humor this time. She'd probably say it was about time I stopped punishing myself for caring too much about justice. Sarah was never angry about the work itself. Maya, she was angry about the way I disappeared into it, the way I let it consume everything else in my life, including our marriage. And would this testimony require you to disappear into it again? No. This would be about standing up in a courtroom and telling the truth about what I witnessed, what I documented. It would be about finishing something instead of running from it. Maya could see Jack working through the decision in real time, weighing the risks against the potential for closure. She also sensed that this was about more than just testimony. It was about whether he could reconcile his current peaceful life with the person he'd been before, whether he could integrate his past instead of hiding from it. Jack, can I tell you something that my therapist used to say? He nodded. She said that healing isn't about forgetting the bad things that happened or pretending they didn't shape us. Healing is about choosing how those experiences get to influence our future. You can let your undercover work be something that destroyed your capacity for connection, or you can let it be something that gave you insight into how to fight for justice without losing yourself. Jack turned to look at her directly. And which choice do you think I should make? I think you should make the choice that lets you sleep peacefully at night. But Jack, I also think you're selling yourself short if you believe you can't testify without losing yourself again. You're not the same person who went undercover 4 years ago. You've learned things about balance, about what matters, about how to protect what's important to you. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, both looking out at the ranch that had become a place of healing for different, but equally profound wounds. Maya found herself thinking about the parallel journeys they'd both taken. How they both had to learn to see their scars as evidence of survival rather than markers of damage. There's something else, Jack said quietly. If I go back to Houston, if I testify, I'll be gone for at least 2 weeks. Maybe longer depending on how the hearings go. I know you're settled here now, but I'd understand if you decided that wasn't something you wanted to deal with. Maya turned to face him fully. Jack Sullivan, are you worried that I'm going to abandon you because your past is complicated? The directness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. I'm worried that you came here looking for peace and I'm about to bring chaos into your life. The only chaos you've brought into my life is the good kind. The kind that shakes up old patterns and makes room for new growth. Maya took a breath, recognizing that she was about to venture into territory that felt both terrifying and necessary. "Jack, what would it mean to you if I said I wanted to come with you to Houston?" Jack's eyes widened. "Maya, that's not necessary. You don't need to disrupt your life for my problems." "What if it's not about disrupting my life? What if it's about choosing to be part of something that matters? You said the trafficking case put away people who hurt vulnerable people. If your testimony can help put away more people like that, then I want to support that work. It could be dangerous. So could crossing the street. So could staying in an abusive relationship. So could deciding to trust someone enough to take a job on their ranch." Maya smiled. "Jack, I've spent 3 years playing it safe, avoiding risks, hiding from anything that might remind me of trauma. It's been necessary for my healing, but I think I'm ready now to choose courage over safety." Jack stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could see him struggling with the idea of accepting help, of believing that someone would willingly step into uncertainty for his sake. "Why?" he asked simply. Maya considered the question seriously. Why was she willing to leave the safety of the ranch to support Jack through what would clearly be a difficult process? Why was she offering to re-enter a world that might contain echoes of the violence she'd worked so hard to heal from? "Because you gave me a place to remember who I am underneath the trauma. Because you helped me start seeing my scars as proof of strength. Because I think maybe it's time for me to discover what I'm capable of when I'm not just surviving, but actually living." She paused, then added more quietly, "And because I care about you, Jack. What happens to you matters to me." The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than Maya had intended, but also undeniably true. Somewhere in the weeks of working together, of sharing coffee and conversation, of witnessing Jack's quiet kindness and steadfast reliability, her feelings had evolved beyond gratitude or professional respect. Jack's expression softened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that made Maya's heart skip slightly. "Maya, you matter to me too. More than I probably should admit given that you work for me and you're still healing from trauma. What if I'm healing enough to make my own choices about what I want and who I want in my life? Then I'd say that having you in Houston, having your support while I face this testimony, would mean more to me than I know how to express." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tightness she'd carried for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "So we're going to Houston?" "We're going to Houston. But Maya, I need you to understand that this isn't just about testifying. Going back means facing people I used to work with, confronting the reasons I left, dealing with the possibility that some of the criminals we didn't catch might try to intimidate or threaten anyone connected to the case. Are you trying to talk me out of this?" Jack smiled, the expression transforming his face in the way that always caught Maya off guard. "No, I'm trying to make sure you know what you're choosing. Because once we're there, once you're publicly connected to this case, there's no taking it back." Maya thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, terrified and broken, convinced that she'd never be strong enough to face conflict or danger again. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, someone who'd rebuilt her life from nothing, who'd found the courage to trust again, who discovered that healing could be a foundation for helping others, rather than just an end goal in itself. "Jack, I'm not the same person who was attacked 3 years ago. I'm not even the same person who took this job 6 weeks ago. I'm someone who's learned that my scars tell a story of survival, and I think maybe it's time to find out what the next chapter of that story looks like." Jack nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" "The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. That gives us time to prepare, to make arrangements for the ranch, to figure out logistics, and to prepare emotionally for whatever we might face there." "Yeah, that too." Maya spent the rest of that day working on ranch accounts with unusual focus, as if organizing financial records, could somehow help her process the enormous decision she'd just made. But underneath the routine tasks, her mind was spinning with questions and possibilities. What would it be like to see Jack in his former professional environment? How would she handle being in a city again, surrounded by crowds and noise and all the stimuli she'd learned to avoid? What if the trauma she thought she'd healed from resurfaced when she was confronted with reminders of violence and danger? But more than the fears, Maya found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in years: excitement about the future. For 3 years, her goals had been modest and defensive, focused on avoiding triggers and managing symptoms and slowly rebuilding a sense of safety. Now, for the first time since the attack, she was choosing to move towards something challenging rather than away from something frightening. That evening, as Maya sat on her cabin porch watching the sun set over the Montana mountains, she called her sister Julie to share the news. "You're going to do what?" Julie's voice carried a mixture of surprise and concern. "I'm going to Houston with Jack to support him during federal testimony about a trafficking case he worked on." "Maya, honey, are you sure you're ready for something like that? I mean, you've made amazing progress, but going back into a situation that involves criminals and court proceedings and potential danger, that seems like a pretty big leap." Maya had expected this reaction from her sister, the protective concern that had characterized all of Julie's responses to Maya's decisions since the attack. But she also understood that Julie's worry came from love, from having watched Maya struggle through the darkest period of her life. "Jules, I know it sounds dramatic, but I think I need this. I need to find out who I am when I'm not just surviving but actually choosing to engage with life again." "But why this? Why put yourself in potential danger for someone you've only known for a few weeks?" It was a fair question, and Maya found herself searching for an answer that would convey the depth of what Jack had come to mean to her without sounding like she'd lost perspective. "Because he saved me, Jules, not in some dramatic rescue way, but in the way that mattered most. He gave me a place where I could remember what it felt like to be valued for my strengths instead of defined by my damage. He helped me start seeing my scars as proof of survival instead of marks of victimization." Julie was quiet for a moment. "You're in love with him." The statement hit Maya with unexpected force, not because it was wrong, but because hearing it said aloud made her realize how true it was. "Yeah, I think I am." "Maya, that's wonderful. But it's also exactly why I'm worried about your judgment here. Are you making this decision because it's what's best for your healing, or because you're afraid of losing him?" Again, Julie's question was perceptive and fair. Maya had been so focused on the practical aspects of supporting Jack and the emotional appeal of choosing courage that she hadn't fully examined her own motivations. "Maybe both," Maya admitted. "But Jules, for 3 years I've made every decision based on fear. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of trusting the wrong person. Fear of putting myself in vulnerable situations. This is the first time I'm making a decision based on love and hope instead of fear and protection. And that feels healthy to you?" Maya considered the question seriously. Did choosing to support Jack through a potentially dangerous situation represent healthy growth, or was she reverting to the pattern of self-sacrifice that had characterized her relationship with her abuser? "It feels different," Maya said finally. "With David, my ex, I sacrificed pieces of myself to try to keep him happy, to avoid his anger, to maintain an illusion of safety that was never real. With Jack, I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing to be part of something that matters, something that could help other people who've been victimized." "Okay, I can hear the difference in your voice. You sound stronger, more certain than you have in years." "I feel stronger. That's what scares me a little, Jules. What if I'm overestimating how much I've healed? What if being in Houston, being around reminders of violence and legal proceedings, what if it triggers setbacks I'm not prepared for? Then you'll handle it the same way you've handled everything else over the past 3 years. One day at a time, with support from people Who care about you? Maya, you've already survived the worst thing that could happen to you. Everything else is just details. After hanging up with Julie, Maya walked to the edge of her porch and looked toward the main house where lights glowed warmly in the kitchen. Windows. She could see Jack's silhouette moving around inside, probably preparing dinner or reviewing documents related to the upcoming testimony. The sight filled her with a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she belonged, that she hadn't experienced since childhood. Her phone rang, and Jack's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," she answered. "Hey yourself. I know it's presumptuous, but I made way too much chili for one person. Any interest in sharing dinner and talking through some of the logistics for Houston?" Maya smiled, recognizing the invitation as Jack's way of continuing their conversation from earlier while respecting her need for space to process the day's revelations. "I'll be right over." Walking to the main house in the gathering darkness, Maya felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with dinner and everything to do with the recognition that her life was about to change again. But this time, the change felt like expansion rather than contraction, like moving toward possibility rather than away from threat. Jack opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been watching for her. "Come in. Fair warning, I tend to overseason everything when I'm thinking about complicated situations. Lucky for you, I like complicated flavors." As they settled at the kitchen table with bowls of impressively spicy chili, Maya realized that this was the first time she'd shared a meal with a man since her relationship with David ended. The recognition should have triggered anxiety or hypervigilance, but instead, she felt peaceful, safe in a way that went beyond physical security to encompass emotional and spiritual well-being. "So," Jack said, breaking the comfortable silence, "Houston logistics. The hearing is expected to last 4 days. But I'll probably need to be there a week before for preparation meetings with prosecutors. We could drive, but that's 2 days each way, or we could fly. What feels better to you?" Jack considered the question. "Driving gives us more control over timing, plus it means we have a vehicle there. Flying is faster but also means dealing with airports and crowds and all the stimulation that comes with commercial travel." Maya nodded. "I vote for driving. I'm not sure I'm ready for airport crowds yet, and having a way to leave if things get overwhelming seems important." "Good point. We can take my truck, make it a road trip. Stop whenever we need to. Take our time getting there and coming back." The casual way Jack included her in his planning, the assumption that they were making these decisions together, filled Maya with warmth. She was accustomed to men who made unilateral decisions and expected her to accommodate their choices. Jack's collaborative approach felt revolutionary. "Jack, what should I expect in Houston? I mean, what's the atmosphere going to be like around the testimony?" Jack set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair, clearly organizing his thoughts. "Tense. These trafficking cases involve people with a lot of money and power, people who don't hesitate to use intimidation tactics. The prosecutors will have security measures in place, but there's always an undercurrent of threat. What kind of intimidation tactics? Following witnesses, photographing them entering and leaving the courthouse, sometimes approaching family members or employers to ask questions that are really threats. The goal is to make people feel exposed and vulnerable so they'll reconsider cooperating with law enforcement." Maya absorbed this information, noting her body's response to the idea of being photographed or followed. There was anxiety, but it was manageable anxiety, the kind that sharpened focus rather than paralyzing it. "How do you handle that? The intimidation attempts?" "Carefully. You stay aware of your surroundings. You don't follow predictable routines. You trust your instincts if something feels wrong. But Maya, you also remember that the intimidation only works if you let it change your behavior. The goal is to testify truthfully and then go home to the life you've built. And you think I'm ready for that? For staying calm under that kind of pressure?" Jack looked at her directly, his green eyes serious but warm. "Maya, you survived someone trying to kill you and then rebuilt your entire life from scratch. You left everything familiar to take a job with a stranger in the middle of nowhere because you were brave enough to bet on your own healing. I think you're ready for whatever Houston throws at us." The confidence in Jack's voice, his matter-of-fact assessment of her strength, filled Maya with a sense of possibility she'd never imagined experiencing again. "I hope you're right." "I am right." "But Maya, there's something else we need to talk about. The sleeping arrangements in Houston." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. They'd been carefully navigating the growing attraction between them, maintaining professional boundaries even. As their personal connection deepened, the idea of sharing hotel rooms raised questions about how those boundaries might evolve. "I'll get my own room," she said quickly. Jack smiled. "I was thinking the same thing. But Maya, I want you to know that my interest in maintaining separate rooms isn't about not trusting myself around you or not wanting to be closer to you. It's about making sure you have space to process whatever comes up without feeling like you have to manage my needs or expectations on top of everything else." The thoughtfulness behind Jack's reasoning touched Maya deeply. David had always made his needs and comfort the center of any stressful situation, expecting her to provide emotional support even when she was struggling herself. Jack's approach, prioritizing her emotional space and processing needs, felt like evidence of the fundamental differences between men who saw women as support systems versus men who saw women as whole people. "Thank you for thinking about that. Though Jack, I hope you know that I don't see supporting you through this testimony as managing your needs. I see it as choosing to be part of something important. I do know that. And Maya, I hope you know that having your support means more to me than I've probably expressed. The idea of going back to Houston, of facing all those memories and complications, it felt overwhelming until you offered to come with me." They finished dinner in comfortable conversation about practical details, travel routes, and what to pack for a week in Texas. But underneath the logistics, Maya sensed a deeper current of anticipation. This trip would test the strength of what they'd built together, the depth of their individual healing, and the potential for their relationship to evolve beyond friendship and professional partnership. As Maya prepared to walk back to her cabin, Jack caught her hand gently. "Maya, whatever happens in Houston, whatever we discover about ourselves or each other, I want you to know that these weeks on the ranch have been the most peaceful I've experienced in years. You've given me something I didn't think I could have again." "What's that?" "The belief that it's possible to build something good without sacrificing who you are in the process." Maya squeezed his hand, marveling at the callous strength of his fingers and the gentle way he held hers. "You've given me something too, Jack. You've helped me remember what it feels like to be valued for my strength instead of protected from my weakness." They stood in the doorway for a moment, hands linked, both seeming to recognize that this conversation marked another shift in their relationship. Maya found herself studying Jack's face in the porch light, memorizing the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. In 3 weeks, they would be in Houston facing unknown challenges and potential dangers. But tonight, standing on the porch of a ranch house in Montana with her hand in his, Maya felt ready for whatever came next. "Good night, Jack." "Good night, Maya. Sweet dreams." Walking back to her cabin under a canopy of stars brighter than anything she'd ever seen in the city, Maya realized that for the first time in 3 years, her dreams were more likely to be sweet than frightening. The scars on her arms told a story of survival, but the growing connection with Jack was helping her write new chapters focused on strength, courage, and the possibility of love worth choosing despite the risks it entailed. The drive to Houston stretched across 2 days of endless highway, rolling plains, and conversations that revealed layers of Jack's past Maya had never imagined. They'd left the ranch early on a Monday morning, Jack's truck loaded with their belongings and a cooler full of sandwiches Maya had insisted on packing. The familiar Montana landscape gradually gave way to the vastness of Wyoming and Colorado, then the oil fields and cattle country of Texas. Jack drove with the steady confidence of someone accustomed to long distances, one hand on the wheel and country music playing softly on the radio. Maya found herself studying his profile as he navigated the interstate, noting the way his jaw tightened whenever they passed signs for Houston, the increasing tension in his shoulders as they drew closer to his former life. "Tell me about your partner," Maya said as they crossed into Texas, sensing that Jack needed to talk through some of his anxiety about the reunion. "The one who sent the letter." Jack glanced at her, then back at the road. "Marcus Washington. Best cop I ever worked with, and probably the closest thing to a best friend I've had since high school. We partnered for 6 years, worked some of the worst cases the department had. Is he still in Houston?" "Far as I know. Marcus was always better at compartmentalizing than I was, better at leaving the work at the office and going home to his family. His wife Carmen used to joke that he had an internal switch that let him be Detective Washington at work and just Marcus at home." Maya heard the wistfulness in Jack's voice, the recognition of a skill he'd never mastered. "You envied that ability?" "More than I probably admitted at the time. Marcus could work a trafficking case all day, documenting the worst of human behavior, then go home and coach his kid's soccer team like nothing had happened. I never figured out how to make that transition." "Is that what cost you your marriage? The inability to leave work at work?" Jack was quiet for several miles, passing 18-wheelers and farm trucks while he considered the question. "Partly. But it was more than that, Maya. The undercover work required me to become someone else so completely that I started losing track of who Jack Sullivan actually was underneath the role. Sarah said it was like being married to a ghost who occasionally remembered he had a wife." The pain in Jack's voice was raw, unhealed despite the years that had passed. Maya found herself wanting to reach across the truck's cab and take his hand, but she sensed that he needed to work through these memories without distraction. "Do you think you know who Jack Sullivan is now?" "Getting there. The ranch helped, the quiet, the routine of caring for animals and land instead of chasing criminals. But Maya, going back to Houston, seeing Marcus and the other guys testifying about that case, it's going to bring back all the reasons I left. And you're afraid you'll get pulled back into that world?" "I'm afraid I'll remember how good I was at it. How much I needed the work to feel useful, to feel like my life had purpose. The trafficking investigation, as much as it cost me personally, it saved kids who were being sold like property. It put away monsters who destroyed innocence for profit. That matters, Maya. That work changes lives." Maya understood the conflict Jack was wrestling with, the tension between personal peace and meaningful work, between self-care and service to others. It was a struggle she recognized from her own healing journey, the question of whether recovery meant withdrawal from anything challenging, or whether true healing enabled greater engagement with difficult realities. "Jack, what if you could do that work without losing yourself this time? What if the person you've become on the ranch, the person who knows how to care for his own well-being, what if that person could be a detective too?" Jack looked at her with surprise. "You think that's possible?" "I think you're different now than you were 4 years ago. You've learned things about balance, about protecting what matters to you. Maybe the choice isn't between being a rancher or being a cop. Maybe it's about being a whole person who can do meaningful work without sacrificing everything else." They stopped for the night in Amarillo, checking into a modest hotel with adjoining rooms and eating dinner at a truck stop diner that served chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes that reminded Jack of his childhood in rural Texas. Maya watched him relax slightly as they sat in the vinyl booth, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of his home state. "You grew up around here?" Maya asked, noting how the waitress had called Jack honey and how he'd automatically said yes ma'am and no ma'am in response to her questions. "About 2 hours south." Little town called Cedar Creek, population maybe 800 on a good day. My dad ran the feed store, my mom taught third grade. Classic small-town childhood until I graduated high school and couldn't wait to get to the big city. What was the appeal of city life? Jack smiled, the expression holding both nostalgia and rueful recognition. I thought small towns were boring, that real life happened in places like Houston and Dallas. I wanted to be where the action was, where I could make a difference in important ways. And now I think maybe the most important differences happen in small, quiet ways. Helping someone heal from trauma, providing a safe place for someone to rebuild their life, caring for animals and land that will be here long after we're gone. Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest at Jack's words, understanding that he was describing not just his own transformation, but the impact he'd had on her life. You've made a difference in important ways, Jack. Just different ways than you originally planned. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in Cedar Creek, taken over the feed store from my dad, married my high school girlfriend, lived the life everyone expected me to live. Do you regret not doing that? Jack considered the question seriously. No, I needed to leave, needed to find out who I could become away from everyone's expectations. But Maya, I also needed to lose myself completely before I could figure out who I actually wanted to be. That night, lying in her hotel bed listening to the sounds of traffic on the interstate, Maya found herself thinking about the parallels between her journey and Jack's. Both of them had needed to be broken down completely before they could rebuild themselves into stronger, more authentic versions of who they were meant to be. Her scars and his emotional wounds told similar stories of surviving destruction and choosing to create something beautiful from the aftermath. The second day of driving brought them into Houston's sprawling metropolitan area, a maze of highways and strip malls and residential neighborhoods that stretched in every direction. Maya felt her anxiety spike as they navigated the heavy traffic, surrounded by more people and noise and stimulation than she'd experienced since leaving Denver. You okay? Jack asked, noting her white-knuckled grip on the door handle. Just adjusting to the crowd density. I'd forgotten how overwhelming cities can be. Jack reached across the cab and squeezed her hand briefly. We can find a hotel on the outskirts, somewhere quieter. The courthouse is downtown, but we don't have to stay in the middle of everything. That would be good. I think I need to ease back into urban life gradually. They found rooms at a hotel near the Galleria, upscale enough to feel safe, but far enough from downtown to avoid the worst of the city noise. Maya's room faced the hotel's courtyard pool rather than the busy street, and she immediately felt her nervous system begin to calm in the quieter environment. Jack knocked on the adjoining door between their rooms late that afternoon. I just got off the phone with Marcus. He wants to meet for dinner tonight, catch up before we get into all the formal stuff tomorrow. Maya could see the mixture of anticipation and apprehension in Jack's expression. How did he sound? Like Marcus? Direct, practical, maybe a little curious about why I'm willing to testify now when I've been avoiding anything connected to law enforcement for 4 years. What did you tell him? That I finally found a reason to stop running from my past. That evening, Maya dressed carefully for dinner, choosing clothes that made her feel confident, but not overdressed. She decided to wear a light sweater. Despite the Houston heat, covering the scars that she wasn't ready to explain to Jack's former partner. The restaurant Jack had chosen was a barbecue place in a neighborhood that clearly held memories for him, based on the way his eyes tracked familiar landmarks as they parked. Marcus Washington turned out to be a compact man with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. He stood up from the booth when they approached, embracing Jack with the easy affection of long friendship, before turning expectant eyes to Maya. Marcus, this is Maya Chun. Maya Marcus Washington, the best partner a cop could ask for. Marcus shook Maya's hand with a firm grip, studying her face with the assessing gaze of someone trained to read people quickly. "Pleasure to meet you." "Maya." Jack didn't mention he was bringing company. "Maya's been working on my ranch, keeping my books straight," Jack explained as they settled into the booth. "She's also become a good friend who was kind enough to make this trip with me." Maya caught the careful way Jack described their relationship, protecting both her privacy and avoiding questions about the nature of their connection. Marcus clearly picked up on the subtext, but he was too polite to push for details. "So you left Houston for ranch life," Marcus said to Jack. "Carmen always said you'd end up with cattle eventually. Said you were too much of a cowboy for city police work." Jack laughed. Carmen was probably right. "How is she? Kids?" "Good. Kids are teenagers now, which means they think I'm an embarrassment to the family name. Carmen still teaches high school English, still corrects my grammar in front of other cops." Maya listened to the easy banter between the two men, noting the genuine affection despite the years of separation. Marcus clearly cared about Jack and was pleased to see him looking healthy and settled, even if he was curious about the circumstances that had brought him back to Houston. "Jack, I have to ask," Marcus said as they waited for their food. "What? Changed your mind about testifying? Last time we talked, you were pretty clear that you were done with anything connected to the department." Jack glanced at Maya, then back at his former partner. "I realized I was letting the people who destroyed my marriage win twice. First by driving me out of the work I loved, then by keeping me from finishing what we started. And the ranch? You're not giving that up?" "No, the ranch is home now. But maybe there's a way to have both, to do work that matters without losing myself in it." Marcus studied Jack's face carefully. "You seem different, calmer. Whatever you've been doing in Montana agrees with you." "It does. I found peace there, but I also found perspective. The work we did mattered, Marcus. Those kids we saved, the traffickers we put away, that was important work. I'm ready to own that again instead of just remembering the cost." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Memories of cases they'd worked together, updates on mutual friends, stories about ranch life that made Marcus laugh and shake his head. Maya found herself enjoying the glimpse into Jack's professional past, seeing him through the eyes of someone who'd known him during his law enforcement career. "Maya," Marcus said, turning his attention to her as they finished eating. "What do you think of our boy here deciding to testify after all these years of hiding in Montana?" The question put Maya on the spot, but she appreciated Marcus's directness. "I think Jack's strong enough now to face his past without being destroyed by it. Sometimes you have to step away from something before you can come back to it as a whole person." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's wise. And accurate, based on what I'm seeing tonight. Jack, you do seem more settled, more like yourself than you did during those last months before you left." After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Marcus pulled Jack aside for a private conversation while Maya waited by the truck. She could see them talking seriously, Marcus's hand on Jack's shoulder in a gesture of support and brotherhood. When Jack returned, his expression was thoughtful but determined. "Everything okay?" Maya asked as they drove back to the hotel. "Yeah, Marcus just wanted to prepare me for tomorrow. Apparently the defense attorneys have been trying to dig up dirt on all the witnesses, looking for anything they can use to discredit our testimony." "What kind of dirt?" "Personal problems, financial issues, anything that might make us look unreliable or biased. In my case, they've probably found out about the divorce, the early retirement, maybe even the ranch purchase." Maya felt a chill of apprehension. "What about me? I mean, if they're investigating witnesses and I'm here with you." Jack pulled into the hotel parking lot and turned to face her directly. "Maya, I need you to understand something. If these defense attorneys decide you're important enough to investigate, they'll find out about your past, about the attack, about everything you've been through. They might even try to use it against both of us." "How?" They might suggest that I'm emotionally compromised by being involved with someone who has a history of being victimized. They might try to paint you as unstable or unreliable because of your trauma history. It's not fair, it's not accurate, but it's the kind of tactics they use. Maya absorbed this information, feeling her hard-won confidence waver slightly. The idea of her most painful experiences being twisted into weapons against Jack's credibility was both infuriating and terrifying. Jack, maybe I should go back to Montana. If my presence here could hurt your testimony. No, Jack's voice was firm. Maya, if they try to use your past against us, we'll deal with it. But I'm not going to let the possibility of their tactics drive you away. You have as much right to be here as anyone else. But what if they're right? What if I am a liability to your credibility? Jack reached across the truck cab and took her hands in his, careful not to push up her sleeves but holding her gently. Maya, listen to me. You are not a liability. You're not broken or damaged or any of the things they might try to suggest. You're someone who survived an attempt on your life and rebuilt yourself into a person strong enough to support someone else through their own challenges. How can you be so sure? Because I've watched you for months now. I've seen how you handle stress, how you make decisions, how you care for others. The person sitting next to me right now is one of the strongest people I've ever known. Anyone who tries to suggest otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the conviction in Jack's voice. What if the testimony brings up memories I'm not ready to handle? What if being around discussions of violence and victims triggers setbacks? Then we'll handle it together. Maya, you don't have to be perfect to be here. You just have to be yourself, and yourself is more than enough. That night, Maya lay awake staring at the hotel ceiling and thinking about the challenges that awaited them. Tomorrow Jack would begin the process of preparing for testimony that could help put dangerous criminals behind bars. She would be there to support him, but she would also be stepping back into a world that contained echoes of her own worst experiences. But as she listened to the sound of Jack moving around in the adjoining room, probably also unable to sleep, Maya realized that her feelings weren't dominated by fear or anxiety. Instead, she felt a quiet determination, a sense of purpose that reminded her of the strength that had carried her through the worst night of her life and the long months of recovery that followed. Her scars told a story of survival, but they also told a story of choice. The choice to fight back when someone tried to destroy her. The choice to seek help when she needed it. The choice to rebuild her life instead of simply enduring it. The choice to trust again despite the risks involved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose courage over safety, new chances to discover what she was capable of when she stopped protecting herself and started living fully. Maya fell asleep thinking about the woman she'd become and wondering what new chapters of strength and resilience the next few days might reveal. Outside her hotel window, Houston hummed with the energy of millions of people pursuing their own stories of survival, success, and second chances. Maya's story was just one among many, but it was hers to write, and she was finally ready to make it a story worth telling. The federal courthouse in downtown Houston rose like a fortress of glass and steel against the morning sky, its imposing facade designed to inspire both respect and intimidation. Maya felt her stomach tighten as Jack navigated the security checkpoint, their identification scrutinized by federal marshals who maintained expressions of professional vigilance. The metal detectors beeped and buzzed as lawyers, witnesses, and court personnel moved through the screening process with practiced efficiency. Jack's preparation meetings had begun 3 days earlier, and Maya had watched him transform from the relaxed rancher she'd come to know into someone more focused, more intense, more reminiscent of the detective he'd once been. He carried himself differently in the courthouse environment, his shoulders straighter, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for potential threats or familiar faces from his law enforcement past. "You sure you want to sit through this?" Jack asked as they rode the elevator to the 15th floor, where the prosecution team maintained their temporary offices. These preparation sessions can be pretty intense. Lots of graphic details about the trafficking operation. Maya adjusted the sleeves of her blazer, ensuring her scars remained hidden, and looked at Jack directly. I've heard graphic details. Before, Jack. In therapy, in my own healing process, in news reports about cases similar to yours. I can handle whatever they're going to discuss. The prosecution team occupied a conference room that buzzed with controlled energy, filled with laptops, file boxes, and whiteboards covered with photographs and timeline charts that told the story of a criminal enterprise spanning multiple states. Maya counted 6 people working at various tasks, all of them radiating the kind of intense focus that suggested careers built on high-stakes litigation. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen, no relation to Maya despite sharing a surname, turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with silver-streaked black hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made witnesses want to answer her questions accurately the first time. She greeted Jack with obvious respect, shaking his hand warmly before turning expectant eyes toward Maya. "This must be the friend Marcus mentioned," Rebecca said, extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Chun, lead prosecutor on this case. Jack's testimony is going to be crucial for establishing the timeline of criminal activity. Maya Chun, I'm here to support Jack through this process." Rebecca studied Maya's face with the assessing gaze of someone trained to evaluate witness credibility under pressure. "Any law enforcement background yourself?" "Accounting. I work on Jack's ranch now, but I spent several years in corporate finance before that." "Good. Financial crimes often involve complex money trails that benefit from accounting expertise. Jack, why don't you introduce Maya to the team while I finish reviewing these depositions?" The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and case overview presentations that gradually revealed the scope of the trafficking operation Jack had helped investigate. The criminal enterprise had operated for nearly a decade, moving vulnerable individuals across state lines for forced labor and sexual exploitation, generating millions in profits while destroying countless lives. Maya found herself both horrified and fascinated by the complexity of the investigation, the painstaking work required to build cases against organizations designed to operate in shadows. She began to understand why Jack had been so completely absorbed by this work, why stopping these crimes had felt more important than maintaining work-life balance or protecting his marriage. "Jack, let's start with your initial infiltration of the organization," Rebecca said, settling into a chair across from him with a legal pad and recording device. "Walk me through how you established your cover identity and gained the trust of key operatives." Maya watched Jack's expression change as he began recounting his undercover work, his voice taking on a professional tone she'd never heard before. He described creating a false identity as a transportation broker, cultivating relationships with criminals who saw him as a potential business partner, gradually working his way deeper into the organization's operations. The challenge was maintaining credibility without actually participating in trafficking activities, Jack explained. "I had to prove my value to the organization while avoiding any actions that would make me complicit in their crimes. It required constant improvisation and extremely careful documentation of every interaction." "Tell me about the documentation. How did you record conversations and transactions without arousing suspicion?" Jack described sophisticated surveillance equipment, hidden recording devices, and coordination with federal agencies that allowed him to gather evidence while maintaining his cover. Maya found herself impressed by the technical complexity of modern undercover operations, the level of planning and support required to infiltrate criminal organizations safely. "Now, Jack, I need to ask about the personal cost of this work," Rebecca said, her tone becoming gentler. "The defense is going to try to portray you as someone who became emotionally unstable due to the pressures of undercover work. They'll suggest that your testimony is unreliable because you suffered psychological damage from the investigation." Maya saw Jack's jaw tighten, but his voice remained steady. The work was difficult, emotionally and psychologically. Pretending to be someone who would profit from human suffering, building relationships with people who destroyed lives for money. It took a toll that I didn't fully recognize at the time. Can you be more specific about that toll? Jack was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him wrestling with how much personal information to share in a professional setting. I became someone my wife didn't recognize. I lost the ability to separate my undercover identity from my actual personality. By the time the investigation concluded, I'd forgotten how to be Jack Sullivan instead of the criminal persona I'd created. Rebecca nodded sympathetically. And how has that changed? Are you psychologically stable enough now to provide reliable testimony? Yes. I spent 4 years learning who I actually am underneath all the roles I've played. I know the difference between Jack Sullivan, the undercover detective, and Jack Sullivan, the person. That clarity will make my testimony more accurate, not less reliable. Maya felt a surge of pride at Jack's composed response, his ability to acknowledge his past struggles while demonstrating his current stability. She also recognized the courage it took for him to expose his vulnerabilities in service of justice for trafficking victims. The preparation session continued for several more hours, covering every aspect of Jack's involvement in the investigation, anticipating defense strategies, and rehearsing responses to challenging questions. Maya noticed that Jack became more animated as he discussed the evidence they'd gathered, the arrests they'd made, the lives they'd saved through their work. One more thing, Jack, Rebecca said as the session wound down. The defense has indicated they plan to call character witnesses who will testify about your behavior during the final months of the investigation. They want to establish a pattern of erratic decision-making and emotional instability. What kind of character witnesses? Former colleagues who observed your increasing isolation and mood changes. Probably your ex-wife, who can testify about the deterioration of your marriage and your inability to maintain personal relationships. Maya saw Jack flinch at the mention of his ex-wife, and she felt a protective anger rise in her chest. The idea that Sarah's pain would be weaponized to discredit Jack's testimony seemed cruel and manipulative, though she understood it was a standard legal tactic. Will I have the opportunity to respond to their character witnesses? Jack asked. Yes, and we'll have our own character witnesses to establish your current stability and reliability. Marcus will testify about your professional competence and integrity. We'd also like to call someone who can speak to your current life circumstances, your successful transition to civilian life, your demonstration of emotional stability over the past several years. Rebecca's eyes shifted to Maya, and she felt her stomach drop as she realized what the prosecutor was suggesting. You want me to testify? Maya asked. If you're willing. You've worked closely with Jack for several months. You've observed his decision-making processes, his emotional regulation, his interpersonal skills. Your testimony could be very valuable for establishing his current credibility. Maya felt the weight of the request, understanding that agreeing to testify would mean exposing herself to the same kind of scrutiny and potential character assassination that Jack faced. The defense attorneys would investigate her background, discover her history of victimization, possibly try to use her trauma against both of them. I need to think about it, Maya said carefully. Of course. We don't need a decision until tomorrow, but Maya, your perspective as someone without law enforcement background could be particularly compelling to jurors. After the preparation session, Jack and Maya walked through downtown Houston in relative silence, both processing the intensity of what they'd experienced and the challenges that lay ahead. The city hummed around them with afternoon traffic and pedestrians, a stark contrast to the quiet ranch environment where they'd both found peace. I'm sorry Rebecca put you on the spot like that, Jack said as they found a quiet cafe where they could sit and decompress. Testifying wasn't part of what you signed up for when you agreed to come to Houston. Maya stirred her coffee thoughtfully, considering her response. Jack, what would my testimony actually accomplish? What would I tell the jury about you? That I'm capable of maintaining professional relationships, that I make sound decisions under pressure, that I've successfully rebuilt my life after a difficult period. Basically, that I'm reliable and stable enough to provide credible testimony. And what would the defense try to do to discredit me? Jack's expression darkened. They'd try to portray you as emotionally compromised, either because of your trauma history or because of your personal relationship with me. They might suggest that you're not objective about my character because you're romantically involved with me. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks at Jack's reference to their romantic involvement, though the description wasn't inaccurate. Their relationship had evolved far beyond friendship or professional partnership. Even if they hadn't explicitly discussed the change, would they be right? Am I too emotionally invested to provide objective testimony? Jack reached across the small table and covered her hand with his, a gesture that had become natural despite the public setting. Maya, you're the most objective person I know when it comes to assessing character and integrity. You've seen me at my worst when I was struggling with the decision to testify, when I was anxious about returning to Houston. You've also seen me at my best, when I'm confident and peaceful and aligned with my values. Your assessment of my stability would be based on months of first-hand observation. But they'd try to make it seem like my judgment is clouded by romantic feelings, probably. But Maya, even if our relationship influences your perspective, that doesn't make your observations less accurate. You care about me, which means you have every reason to notice if I was showing signs of instability or poor judgment. Maya considered this reasoning, recognizing the logic while still feeling apprehensive about voluntarily subjecting herself to cross-examination by hostile defense attorneys. What if I can't handle the pressure? What if being questioned about my own trauma triggers some kind of breakdown that hurts your case? Jack squeezed her hand gently. Maya, you've handled every challenge we've faced together with remarkable grace and strength. But if you decide you're not ready to testify, I'll completely understand and support that decision. You wouldn't be disappointed? I'd be proud of you for knowing your own limits and protecting your well-being. Maya, your presence here has already given me more support than I had any right to expect. You don't owe me or anyone else additional sacrifice. That evening, Maya called her sister Julie to discuss the possibility of testifying, needing an outside perspective on the decision she faced. They want you to testify in a federal trafficking case. Julie's voice carried a mixture of surprise and concern. Maya, that sounds like a huge responsibility and a lot of pressure. It is, but Julie, Jack's testimony could help put away people who destroy lives for profit. If my testimony helps establish his credibility, if it helps the prosecution get convictions, then maybe it's worth the personal cost. What kind of personal cost are we talking about? Maya explained the defense strategy of discrediting witnesses through character assassination. The possibility that her trauma history would be exposed and weaponized. The risk that her growing relationship with Jack would be portrayed as evidence of compromised judgment. Honey, those are serious risks. Are you sure you're emotionally prepared to have your worst experiences discussed in a courtroom full of strangers? I don't know. But Julie, I've spent 3 years learning to see my scars as proof of survival instead of marks of victimization. Maybe testifying would be another step in that process, another way of refusing to let trauma define my limitations. Julie was quiet for several minutes, and Maya could imagine her sister weighing the potential benefits against the obvious dangers. Maya, what does Jack think you should do? He says he'll support whatever decision I make. He's not pressuring me either way. That's good. That suggests he's thinking about your well-being instead of just what would benefit his case. I think he is. Jack's been incredibly protective of my healing process from the beginning. He wouldn't want me to testify if he thought it would hurt me. But he also might not fully understand what it could cost you emotionally to have your trauma dissected by hostile lawyers in a public forum. Maya recognized the truth in Julie's concern. Jack had witnessed her strength and resilience, but he hadn't experienced the kind of systematic, psychological assault that defense attorneys might employ to discredit her testimony. "Jules, what would you do if you were in my position?" "Honestly, I'd probably testify. Not because it's the safe choice or the easy choice, but because you've come so far in your healing that you might be ready to transform your experience from something that happened to you into something you can use to help others." "Explain what you mean." "You survived an attempt on your life, and then you rebuilt yourself into someone strong enough to support someone else through their own challenges. That's not just personal healing, Maya. That's the kind of transformation that could inspire other trauma survivors. That could show them what's possible when you refuse to let victimization be the end of your story." Maya felt something click into place as Julie spoke, a recognition that testifying might represent another form of choosing courage over safety, another opportunity to demonstrate that survival could become strength. "I think I'm going to do it," Maya said quietly. "Then I'll be proud of you and scared for you and rooting for you every step of the way." The next morning, Maya informed Rebecca that she was willing to testify about Jack's character and stability. The prosecutor's face lit up with satisfaction, though she also took time to warn Maya about the challenges she would face during cross-examination. "The defense will try to rattle you, to make you emotional or angry or uncertain," Rebecca explained. "They'll ask intrusive questions about your personal life, your mental health history, your relationship with Jack. The key is to stay calm. Answer only the questions asked, and remember that you're telling the truth while they're trying to obscure it." Maya spent the next 2 days in preparation sessions, learning how to frame her observations about Jack's character in terms that would resonate with jurors, practicing responses to hostile questions, and developing strategies for maintaining composure under pressure. Jack attended these sessions when his schedule allowed, and Maya could see him watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. She understood that he was proud of her willingness to testify, but worried about the personal cost she might pay for supporting his case. "You're going to be great," Jack said as they walked back to the hotel after her final preparation session. "You're articulate, credible, and you genuinely understand what stability and reliability look like because you've worked so hard to develop those qualities yourself. I hope the jury sees it that way." "Jack, what happens after the trial? Win or lose, what comes next for us?" Jack stopped walking and turned to face her on the busy sidewalk, seemingly oblivious to the pedestrians flowing around them. "What do you want to come next, Maya?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications about their relationship, their future plans, their individual healing journeys. Maya realized that testifying in Jack's trial had become a catalyst for examining what she truly wanted from life beyond simple safety and peace. "I want to go back to the ranch with you," she said slowly. "But I also want to find ways to use what we have both learned about healing and survival to help other people. I do not want to just hide from the world anymore, Jack. I want to engage with it from a position of strength." Jack's smile was bright, transforming his entire face with joy and relief. "Maya, that is exactly what I want too. To go home to Montana together, but also to find meaningful work that honors what we have both survived and overcome, even if it means occasionally facing difficult situations like this trial. Especially then. Maya, watching you prepare to testify, seeing your courage and determination, it has reminded me that meaningful work does not have to cost everything else that matters. Not when you have the right partner to share the load." Standing on a crowded Houston sidewalk with the federal courthouse looming in the distance, Maya felt a sense of completeness she had not experienced since childhood. Her scars would always tell the story of the worst night of her life, but they would also tell the story of her choice to survive, to heal, to love again despite the risks involved. Tomorrow she would testify in federal court about Jack's character and stability. She would face hostile cross-examination designed to shake her confidence and discredit her observations. She would risk having her most painful experiences exposed and weaponized by defense attorneys, but she would also demonstrate that trauma survivors could become advocates for justice, that healing could be a foundation for service rather than an end goal in itself, that love was strong enough to choose courage over safety when the stakes were high enough. Her scars told stories of survival, but the next chapter would tell a story of transformation, of two people who had found strength in their wounds and chosen to use that strength in service of something larger than their individual peace. Maya was ready to tell that story, whatever the cost might be. The courtroom felt smaller than Maya had expected, filled with the quiet tension that preceded moments of truth. She sat in the witness waiting area, her hands folded carefully in her lap to hide their slight trembling, listening to the muffled sounds of testimony coming from beyond the heavy wooden doors. Jack had been on the stand for 2 hours already, his voice steady and professional as he recounted the details of his undercover investigation. Rebecca Chun appeared beside her, settling into the adjacent chair with the controlled energy that had characterized all her interactions. "He is doing beautifully in there. Clear, credible, completely unshakable under cross-examination." The defense attorney tried to rattle him about his marriage and early retirement, but Jack handled it perfectly. Maya nodded, though her stomach remained tight with anticipation. "When will they call me?" "Probably within the hour." "Maya, remember what we practiced. Answer the questions directly. Do not volunteer extra information. And if you need a moment to compose yourself, just ask for water. The jury will respect your honesty more than any performance." The doors opened and Jack emerged, his face showing the strain of intensive questioning but also a quiet satisfaction. He spotted Maya immediately and crossed the space between them, in quick strides, settling beside her with obvious relief. "How do you feel?" Maya asked quietly. "Like I remembered who I used to be, but in a good way this time." "Maya, I told the truth about everything. The investigation, the personal cost, the reasons I left law enforcement. It felt like finally making peace with that part of my life instead of just running from it." Before Maya could respond, a court officer appeared to escort her into the courtroom. Jack squeezed her hand briefly, his touch warm and reassuring. "You are going to be perfect. Just tell them what you know about who I am now." The courtroom was indeed smaller than she had imagined, but the weight of attention felt enormous as Maya walked to the witness stand. 12 jurors watched her with varying expressions of curiosity and assessment, while the defense table held 3 attorneys, who radiated the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested they believed they could discredit any witness who challenged their strategy. "Please state your name for the record," Rebecca began after Maya had been sworn in. "Maya Chun." "Miss Chun, how do you know the defendant Jack Sullivan?" "I work for Jack as a bookkeeper and accountant on his ranch in Montana. I have been employed there for approximately 4 months. During that time, have you had extensive interaction with Mr. Sullivan?" "Yes, we work together daily, and I live in a guest cabin on his property." Rebecca guided Maya through a series of questions about her observations of Jack's character, his decision-making processes, his emotional stability, and his professional competence. Maya found herself relaxing slightly as she described the man she had come to know, the thoughtful way he approached problems, his kindness to animals and employees, his careful management of the ranch's complex financial requirements. "Miss Chun, based on your 4 months of close interaction with Jack Sullivan, do you consider him to be a reliable and trustworthy person?" "Absolutely. Jack is one of the most principled people I have ever known. He is thoughtful, consistent in his values, and completely honest in all his dealings." "Would you trust his word if he told you something under oath?" "Without question." Rebecca smiled with satisfaction and turned to the defense table. Your witness. The lead defense attorney was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made witnesses want to be very careful with their words. She approached the witness stand with a predatory smile that made Maya's skin crawl. Miss Chun, you testified that you have known Mr. Sullivan for 4 months. That is not a very long time to assess someone's character, is it? 4 months of daily interaction provides substantial opportunity to observe someone's behavior patterns and decision-making processes. But you did not know him during the period when he was allegedly suffering from psychological stress related to his undercover work, did you? No, I did not. So your testimony about his reliability is based solely on observing him after he'd already removed himself from the stressful environment that caused his previous problems. Maya recognized the trap being set, the attempt to make her testimony seem irrelevant to the question of Jack's credibility during the investigation period. My testimony is based on observing Jack's fundamental character traits, which don't change based on external circumstances. The attorney's smile sharpened. Miss Chun, isn't it true that you and Mr. Sullivan are romantically involved? Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. Jack and I have developed a close personal relationship, yes. So, your assessment of his character might be influenced by your romantic feelings rather than objective observation? My feelings for Jack are based on my observations of his character, not the other way around. I care about him because I've seen evidence of his integrity and kindness, not in spite of character flaws I choose to ignore. Miss Chun, have you ever been the victim of a violent crime? The question hit Maya like a physical blow, though she'd known it was coming. Rebecca had warned her that the defense would try to use her trauma history to discredit her judgment, but hearing it asked in open court still felt like a violation. Yes. Can you tell the jury about that experience? Maya took a deep breath, drawing on all the strength she'd built over 3 years of healing. 3 years ago, I was attacked by an ex-boyfriend who tried to kill me. I survived the attack and have spent the time since then in recovery and therapy. That must have been very traumatic. Do you suffer from any ongoing psychological effects from that attack? I have some scarring and occasional anxiety symptoms, but I've worked extensively with mental health professionals to address the impact of the trauma. The attorney's expression became falsely sympathetic. Miss Chun, isn't it possible that your experience as a victim of violence has made you particularly susceptible to feeling protective toward men you perceive as vulnerable or damaged? Maya felt anger flare in her chest, but she remembered Rebecca's coaching about staying calm under provocation. My experience as a survivor of violence has taught me to recognize genuine strength versus performed strength. Jack Sullivan possesses genuine strength. But wouldn't someone with your trauma history be drawn to a man who seems to need rescuing or protection? Jack doesn't need rescuing. He's not a victim, and neither am I. We're both survivors who've done the work necessary to heal and move forward with our lives. The attorney pressed harder, asking intrusive questions about Maya's therapy, her medication history, her ability to form objective judgments about men, given her history of being victimized. Each question felt designed to paint her as emotionally unstable or psychologically compromised, but Maya found herself growing stronger rather than more shaken as the cross-examination continued. Miss Chun, given your history of poor judgment in romantic relationships, how can the jury trust your assessment of Mr. Sullivan's character? The question crossed a line that made Maya's protective instincts flare. My judgment in that previous relationship was not poor. I recognized dangerous behavior and took steps to leave. The violence that followed was not a result of my poor judgment but of one person's choice to commit criminal acts. But you did enter into a relationship with someone who proved to be violent. I entered into a relationship with someone who concealed his violent tendencies until I tried to leave. Abusers are skilled at manipulation and deception. My inability To read his mind doesn't constitute poor judgment. Maya could see several jurors nodding approvingly at her response, and the defense attorney's expression suggested she realized her strategy was backfiring. No further questions. Rebecca stood for redirect examination, her expression showing satisfaction with how Maya had handled the hostile questioning. Miss Chun, you mentioned that your experience as a trauma survivor taught you to recognize genuine strength. Can you explain what you mean by that? Genuine strength is when someone can face difficult situations without losing their core values or treating others poorly. Performed strength is when someone uses aggression or intimidation to hide their insecurities. Jack possesses genuine strength. Thank you. No further questions. As Maya left the witness stand, she felt a profound sense of completion. She had faced hostile questioning designed to break her down, and she had responded with honesty and dignity. More importantly, she had refused to let her trauma be weaponized against Jack or portrayed as evidence of weakness rather than survival. Jack was waiting for her outside the courtroom, his face showing a mixture of pride and concern. Maya, you were incredible in there. I could hear your voice getting stronger with each question they threw at you. I felt stronger. Jack, they tried to make my scars into evidence of damage, but I think I showed the jury that they're actually proof of strength. You definitely did. Maya, I'm so proud of you for having the courage to testify, for standing up to that cross-examination, for refusing to let them diminish what you've survived and overcome. 3 days later, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges against the trafficking ring's leadership. The convictions carried sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years in federal prison, effectively dismantling an organization that had destroyed countless lives for profit. Maya and Jack sat in the courtroom gallery holding hands as the verdicts were read, both understanding that they had played small but meaningful roles in achieving justice for victims who deserved to see their tormentors held accountable. That evening, as they prepared to begin the drive back to Montana, Rebecca Chun stopped by their hotel to thank them personally for their testimony. Jack, your evidence was crucial for establishing the timeline of criminal activity. Maya, your character testimony helped establish Jack's credibility beyond any doubt. You both should be proud of the service you've provided to those victims. What happens now? Maya asked. Will there be appeals? More testimony required? Probably appeals, but the evidence was overwhelming. These convictions should stand, and the investigation has generated leads that will help law enforcement target similar organizations in other states. The drive back to Montana felt different from their journey to Houston, filled with a sense of completion and possibility rather than anxiety and uncertainty. Jack seemed more relaxed than Maya had ever seen him, as if testifying had indeed helped him make peace with his law enforcement past, rather than simply running from it. Jack, what are you thinking about? Maya asked as they crossed into Wyoming, the familiar landscape of the West beginning to appear outside their windows. I'm thinking about how different this feels from when I left Houston 4 years ago. Then I was running away from everything that had defined me, convinced that meaningful work and personal happiness were mutually exclusive. Now I feel like I'm returning home with a clearer sense of who I am and what I want. What do you want? Jack glanced at her with the warm smile that had first made her heart skip months ago. I want to go back to the ranch with you. I want to continue building the life we've started together. But I also want to find ways to do work that matters. Maybe consulting on trafficking cases or helping train other undercover officers to maintain their psychological health. That sounds perfect. Jack, I've been thinking too about what I want beyond just safety and peace. What conclusion did you reach? Maya looked out at the endless sky above the Wyoming plains, feeling a sense of possibility that would have been unimaginable 3 years ago. I want to help other trauma survivors understand that healing can be a foundation for service rather than just an end goal. Maybe through counseling, maybe through advocacy work, Maybe through sharing our story to show other people what's possible. Our story? The story of two people who were broken by their experiences, but chose to rebuild themselves into something stronger. The story of how scars can become proof of survival rather than marks of damage. Jack reached across the truck cab and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become natural and necessary. Maya, I love our story, and I love that it's still being written. 6 months later, Maya stood on the porch of the ranch house looking out at cattle grazing peacefully in the Montana sunshine while Jack worked on fence repairs in the distance. The Morrison Foundation, inspired by their experiences in Houston, had begun operations as a non-profit organization, providing support and advocacy for trauma survivors who wanted to transform their healing into service to others. Maya's role as Director of Counseling Services allowed her to help other survivors recognize their own strength, while Jack's position as law enforcement liaison helped bridge the gap between victim services and criminal justice. Together, they had built something meaningful from the wreckage of their individual traumas, creating a legacy that honored their survival while helping others find their own paths to healing and purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text from a client, a young woman who'd recently testified in a domestic violence case against her abuser. Thank you for helping me see my scars as proof of strength. The jury believed me, and he's going to prison. Maya smiled, rolling up her sleeves to reveal the network of pale lines that crisscrossed her forearms. In the bright Montana sunlight, the scars looked like what they truly were, evidence of a night when she had fought for her life and won, marks of survival that had become symbols of the strength that carried her forward each day. Jack appeared on the porch, sweaty from his work, but grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. How was your day? Perfect. Absolutely perfect. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and Maya leaned back against his solid chest, feeling safe and valued and completely at home. Her scars told stories of survival, but the life she'd built told an even better story about the beauty that could grow from the darkest soil, the love that could flourish when two wounded people chose to heal together rather than apart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.